Schema theory is a constructivist theory found in a number of different disciplines, from psychology to education to reading to math to science. Constructivism is a theory of how we learn that puts the student at the center of actively creating their own knowledge. How do we do this? Through relating new incoming information to our prior knowledge and past experiences. From a constructivist point of view, all meaningful learning is a form of active knowledge on the part of the student. Schema theory follows this train of thought. Think about the following situations, concepts, or categories that I'm about to show you. A wedding, a cup, cooking, a letter, manners, and nature. When I say these words to you, for each word you think of a list of things related to that word, concept, or situation. This is a schema. A schema is like a folder that we file everything we know about an endless amount of topics. Everything we've ever learned and now know is organized into different schemata, which is the plural for schema. According to Green, we make sense of new information based on our prior cognitive experiences that shape our schemas. And on top of that, everyone's schema is individualized because we're all humans, and we've all lived a different life full of different knowledge and experiences. When we hear or read new information, our brain scours through our existing schemata to find a place for the new information. All input is matched against existing schemata. And this is a cognitive process that is implicit, meaning we're not really conscious of what is causing us to perceive, remember, or comprehend. Our brain just does it. And what happens when we don't have an existing schema in which to file certain new information? Well, our brain creates a new file and stores everything related to this new concept into that file. Once the new information is actively stored in a corresponding schema, it becomes easier to remember that particular concept because it's filed and easier to retrieve. Different genres of schema theory exist, but I will focus on schema theory and reading. On the topic of reading and teaching reading, researchers posit that text alone doesn't harbor its own meaning, but the background knowledge of the reader gives text its meaning. The text provides directions for the reader about how they should organize meaning based on their existing knowledge. So, comprehending a text is a continually interactive process between background knowledge and the text. And if appropriate schemata don't exist, students will have a hard time trying to comprehend the meaning of the text. Researcher Carell posits that there are two types of schemata. Formal, which is the background knowledge about and expectations for differences among rhetorical structures, differences in genre, structure of fables, simple stories, scientific texts, newspaper articles, poetry, and so on. And content schemata, which is background knowledge about the content of the text. When these two types of schemata are present in reading, there's a good chance that the reader will comprehend what they need to. However, if the reader fails to activate either, they will not derive meaning from the text. I have a friend that graduated from a university in Budapest with his master's in gender studies. Most of what he talks about from school I can understand at its core, but I can't participate because some of the concepts in the vocabulary are completely unknown to me. And they don't exist in my schema. He has repeatedly told me the name and basis of his thesis. Subjectivity without return, reparatively weaving selves and others on the same side. And still, to this day, I can't grasp its meaning, and I couldn't tell you what the paper was about. Because I've never studied his sources or sat in on one of his classes, and the concept is so foreign to my interest of studies, it does not exist in my schema, even though he's told me quite a few times. The following is a YouTube video that I found is a great overall summary with examples of schemata and how they function. Although it doesn't particularly focus on reading, it's a really great explanation of how your brain works to store existing information and new information.
Schemas are interesting because we all have them, but we don't all have the same schemas. And schemas are a way that we organize our thoughts, what we pay attention to, what's important to us, how we make meaning of situations. So if you can imagine, your brain is a little manufacturing plant, and so I expose you to a particular experience. Let's say you're walking down the street on the sidewalk, and all of a sudden there's a fairly assertive dog that you notice in this person's yard that doesn't seem to be contained, no leash, no owner in sight. And as a child, let's say you were actually bitten by a dog. So when you experience this, you're organizing the thoughts, you're collecting all this data, and you have dog, you have barking dog, you have unattended dog, you have a schema in your mind that dogs can be very dangerous. I've been bitten by dogs, you have to be very careful around a dog. So all of a sudden you're making meaning of the situation, that this is a dangerous situation, I should probably turn around or avoid it or freeze or run or whatever you think is the appropriate process. I'm in that same situation, let's say, and I had dogs my whole life, I love dogs, I had big dogs, barking dogs, crazy dogs, never had a bad experience with a dog. So I'm in exactly the same situation you're in, but my schema, the way I organize the idea, is that, oh, look at that great dog, and I'm walking up to the dog ready to pet the dog and not the least bit concerned about it. So the reality of the situation was the same for both of us. We're both exposed to a barking dog with no owner in sight. But the meaning you took away from it was, this is a threatening situation, and I took away, oh, look at the great dog. And those are examples of schemas. We all have different ways to organize our experiences in our mind and make meaning. We also pay attention to things based on our schemas. So another person who had, perhaps has absolutely no schema for dogs might not have even noticed the dog at all until the dog took some action that was, that triggered a schema. Mm-hmm. So that's a long-winded way of saying the reality that you live in, the way you make meaning of the world, is a response to the schemas that you have in your mind.
Mm-hmm. And that all happens in an instant? In
an instant. And that's why, some people's behavior makes absolutely no sense to you, because the schemas that they're using to form their meaning from this experience, which drives their behavior, is very different than the schemas you have. So a great example that I like to use is, having grown up in a rural area, I tend to be very trusting of people because we didn't have any crime, there was no stolen cars or no break-ins, so I tend not to lock my car. My wife grew up in Chicago, so she's always reminding me, did you lock the car? Did you lock the car? And, for me, it sounds like, gosh, you're paranoid, who's going to want to take anything in the car? From her standpoint, she looks at me like I'm an idiot, because who leaves their car unlocked? And we're both right. We're operating with different schemas. My schema says people can be trusted, there's no need to lock a car. Her schema is, we had stolen cars all the time in Chicago, you lock your car. So that's an example of how schemas drive meaning and change behavior from person to person to person.
This idea that different people will act completely different in the same situation can be situated in the reading mindset as well. Two different students will read the same text in two completely different ways based on their existing schemata. Our job as teachers is to help our students facilitate new schema to fit the demands of the text that they must comprehend.